Okay.
Good morning. Welcome to the first Sunday meeting of the Logos Center group. We're delighted to be with you again. We want to talk with you this morning about life and death and the continuity of life and these times that are so challenging for the lives of so many people. People losing their loved ones and the obituary column being double the length it's been before.
Yeah.
So we need to address these concerns as we see friends and loved ones transition, wondering what happened to them and how we handle that grief and whether we go through the stages of grief that have been taught to us, anger and depression and resentment. So we want to talk with you about life after death and communication with the spirit plane.
Right. This has been an interest of ours always, and way before my son Stephen died, I had an interest in life after death and communicating with loved ones who died. And then after he died, I had a real interest in establishing a communication with him. And what I've discovered over the years, and I think this is true for most of us, if we would make a concentrated effort to communicate with our loved ones who've died, and we'll work with certain techniques of listening and keeping a journal and writing down the things you ask and the answers that you feel that you hear, it gets easier and easier, and you begin to establish a relationship with your loved one. It's different than when they had a physical body, but it can be a continuation of a relationship that we have here on earth with them and communicating with them.
You've been communicating with Sherry Pearl. She's a New York City investigator that's especially working with electronic voice recordings. She is getting voices from the spirit plane and
recognizable ones too.
Yes, and the Casey readings say that this is possible, that one day there will be such a device to enhance this communication. Certainly, going back as far as Edison, there's been this attempt to develop a telephone for the spirit plane. Some deniers say that it hasn't been done, and yet they're saying it's possible. So we want to look into that. How can we communicate with the loved ones? My experience has been, as I've seen psychics give galley readings, that basically the only question people want to know is, my loved one in the spirit plane okay? How are they doing? And isn't that what you wonder about?
That's what I want to be sure Stephen is okay, and that's always my first question. So that's what all parents or people that have lost loved ones want to know. Are they okay? What are they doing? Are they okay?
Well, now, once you establish that communication, what is the ongoing potentiality for that?
To ask them what it's like on the other side. I do a series of things. I ask them what it's like, what they're doing, and sometimes I get information that they're attending classes or different things like that, and other times that they're studying, and just a variety of things. I have a collection of books about people having near-death experiences and talking with their loved ones, and there are about as many stories and instances of different types of communication. Bill Guggenheim has written one of the best books. Bill and his former wife, Judy Guggenheim, wrote Hello from Heaven. And he lists in there a number of ways that people have been communicated with from the other side, and has a variety of stories. He even uses a quote from Stephen Lives, my book, in his book. And he and I have been on television. You were on with us too. We were on television talking about that, and that is always a topic that people have a lot of interest in. Because one of the saddest things for those of us with children is if you have a child die, not only is it heartbreaking, but it's like they're gone. And even some people won't even talk about their loved ones. They say, it hurts too much, or I don't want to look at pictures, and they take all the pictures out of the house. I feel like there are those on the other side that really want to hear from us. And I often say to people I'm counseling with, how would you feel? Just imagine you had died and you're on the other side, and you have a lot of loved ones, and you want to get a message to them, you want to communicate with them. How would you do that? What would you ask? What would you say? How would you listen? You have to learn to listen in a different way. For instance, telepathy, we don't practice telepathy much in these physical bodies, but being able to pick up on what somebody says or thinks is a way we're going to communicate on the other side. When you have a dream, you rarely in the dream, if you'll notice, see the person's mouth moving. Usually they're communicating with you telepathically in your dream, not always. And so that's the way we have to establish communication with our loved ones who've died, is to learn to talk with them in a different way. Just like you learn to talk to children based upon their age and what they can understand, we need to learn to listen, to talk to hear in a different way.
Well, the biggest thing we need is an expanded sense of consciousness. That we have this narrow notion, you live and die and go to heaven or hell or purgatory, or you just die and that's it. And yet the evidence is so strong that there is continuity of life, there is life after death, there is communication that's possible. And these are research endeavors that can be pursued objectively, and they have been, and there's the evidence there. And I'm always amazed that people prefer their belief system to the facts. Their religion they hold in preference to what the facts are. And science has contributed to that because they have been narrow as well. So I've indicted both the Christian theology and scientific worldview that are so limiting about what is the nature of the soul and its continuity. So one of the things that Anna and I have been talking about is the idea that people may check out to get back in so that they can join up with another group. I've called it, for the years, I've called it the Rendezvous Principle, that if someone comes in, the illustration I use is you invite someone over to a party. Come over, it's open from 6 to 9, and the person says, well, I'd like to be there at 9, but I have an 8 o'clock appointment, so I can drop by at 6, and then I have to leave early. Now, that frequently happens in everyday life, and it happens in the spirit plane because we come in to be with the group, we do our work, and then we check out because we need to be with another group later on, incarnating together. So as we've often discussed, if we're sitting there with a group, like a study group, and say, you know, we've all been together before, well, how did that happen that we arranged that? So we need to get an idea of God's timing about our coming in and going out and coming in and going out, and not have a sense of such a finality of it. Now, Anne says, yes, I communicate and I'm close to Stephen, but I miss hugging his body. So there is that physical absence of the one you love that you want to hug. But there's a bigger thing about this, and the true relationship is the soul and personality relationship. And the physical body, you know, we have loved ones that we communicate with. Maybe you have an overseas assignment and you communicate, maybe even Zoom or something. But we don't have to be in the physical presence to maintain an ongoing relationship. And that's true for those of us presently in the spirit plane and those in the physical plane and those in the spirit plane.
Bill Guggenheim wrote a wonderful book, Hello from Heaven, that I've mentioned before many times and often refer to that. And he has so many stories in there of things to look for that your loved one is trying to communicate with you. They'll move things sometimes, they will. There are just so many things. And when I read the book for the first time, I thought, my golly, so many of those things have happened to me, but these other things have not happened to me. So everybody doesn't have the same experiences. And in the books on recovering from a suicide when you've attempted and have a near-death experience, or all these near-death experiences that people have, give us a real clue about what life on the other side is like, because a number of those experiences that people have had when they died, and some of them were supposedly dead for longer than they could have survived but recovered, they come back with these stories of what it's like, and we get a better awareness of what we may experience on the other side. So lately, when I've been praying at night, I've been asking to have a gentle death when it's time for me to transition, and to learn to understand telepathy more, so that I can be aware already before I get on the other side and communicate better. Those little things I do.
Your remarks remind me of an experience I had in England. We were there a week and met with 5 of the famous psychics in England. And the reading that I thought was so fascinating, Lucille and David Kahn were very close to the Caseys. I think David probably received several hundred readings.
Okay.
And he died just before we went on this trip to England. And so we set up with Ina Twigg, a English medium, for her to give a reading for Lucille. And it was fascinating. For one thing, David couldn't speak directly, but Edgar Casey was there, and Ina Twigg says, I can talk with Casey, and David can relay his message to him. So that was fascinating. Then afterwards, Lucille was disappointed in the reading and didn't feel that it offered anything. But I wrote up the notes that I had taken from the whole reading, and those notes appear in Lucille's book about Casey and her husband. And one of the things that Ina Twigg picked up on is she kept saying, bang, 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 bang. And that just distressed Lucille. But what it was about was that just before he died, the washing machine had gotten out of balance and overloaded, and they had commented, Lucille and David had commented about this bang, bang, bang. And so once Lucille thought about it, she said, of course it's veridical, of course that was a good reading. But she had downplayed it before. Now, the moral of the story is, my point is, we may disregard the obvious. There may be amazing things, like we learned that those in the spirit plane can especially affect electronic devices or electrical. And we had more than one occasion in which a doorbell rang and no one was there. And the same way with fire alarms.
Right.
There were 3 instances, and 2 of them were from Stephen, and one was
a spider.
that had gotten in the fire alarm system. And so you can't be gullible about it, and yet
You have to be discerning, yeah.
Yeah, and they want to get through to us. They want to communicate with us. And as Anne has often pointed out, what would it be like to be on the other side there and want to speak and being able to speak, and even the messages that the loved one is receiving, they're disregarding. So we need a whole open view about the soul and the universes of consciousness, and we've just got to get away from that old religious narrowness. There's one life, and then there's heaven and hell. By the way, when you're concerned about your loved one, remember Casey says, the only hell there is that we make for ourselves.
Yeah.
People who are haters and destroyers and committing regularly offensive and evil things, they're making their own hell. Here's something that's fascinating to me about that. Casey says, isn't it amazing that the mind of man conceive of God and creation, and that same mind can conceive of ways of destroying their fellow man, not realizing they are destroying themselves. So those who develop ways of destroying their fellow man, like those carrying their AR-15s around to meetings, they're destroying themselves. They're not protecting themselves. They have a consciousness of fear and anger, and that's going to be carried over with them in the spirit plane. And what we carry over in the spirit plane, I read a reading just a month ago that said, even a moment of joy even a moment of joy can have an effect on a subsequent incarnation. So when we say we'll give account of every idle word and thoughts or things, we have to give account of every idle thought. Why is that so? The accounting is for ourselves because we are building our own selves and our own potential for conscious experiences. So we need to be mindful of us as ourselves as co-creators with God, and then consider with every thought that we're creating our own future.
Well, I wanted to just mention a little bit because I was alluding to the fact that many people writing about near-death experiences all have different stories. There's a similarity, but they're all very different. And my book, Stephen Lives, Stephen's Life, Suicide, and Afterlife that I wrote years ago, I talk about my way of communicating with Stephen, and it's just one way, and his experiences that he shares with me, it's just one set of experiences. But it gives us an idea of what may potentially happen as after we die, and when somebody tries to communicate with us, or when we try to communicate from the other side, or when we try to communicate from this side to them. So there are a whole lot of things involved in it, and my suggestion, because it's worked for me, and I've also gotten some flack about it, it said, it's hard to believe that Anne really can hear sentence after sentence from Stephen. And I want to clear that up by saying I wasn't able to hear that well in the beginning. That took years of practice before I really could hear so well and trusted the accuracy of what I was getting. So it takes a while to have the confidence to work in that way, but it can be really helpful. I can't tell you how many people have called me and said, you know, my so-and-so, my son, my husband, or whatever died. Could you just tune in and find out how he's doing? And sometimes I can do that, and it can be healing and helpful to them. But people are fearful in hearing about their loved ones who've died because they think if they haven't had the most ideal life, they may be suffering or going through all kinds of things. And what we have found from the research that we've done and the study we've done, and what Stephen has told me and other things that I have read and studied, is that the death of a person by any means, suicide, car wreck, whatever, the leukemia, whatever it might be, that their experience on the other side is not all that different. It's not as if God punishes the one who commits suicide or the one who's careless and has an accident, but rather the afterlife is very similar and is not one where there's great punishment that is given to...
Well, we're meeting ourselves. What we've been building is the continuity of life. Oh, Casey says, oh, that all would understand the continuity of life. Life goes on. And part of what we're talking about is the sort of divine timing of our deaths. A death is not ordinarily by accident. There is a timing to it. For example, Anne's communication with God and about Stephen, he came in knowing that she would write about him, but he could have been murdered, he could have been killed in an accident, he could have died by suicide. There was a divine timing there. And so we need to realize that not everyone on the planet Earth can live to be 90 or 100 years old. Some need to check out early, some need to continue on. And the reason I'm stressing this, I remember a case, a Logos member of years ago. She had two sons. One was a favorite and one was not so compatible. The one that she favored was killed in an automobile accident, and she got mad at God, and as though God had taken her son. And so she, you know, she needed a faith that would carry her through that and know that he could move into the spirit plane in divine timing, and that it may not have been an accident. It may have been his way of getting out in time to get back to another class in the spirit plane or meeting with other people. Yeah. So if we get a sense that people just don't accidentally die, that everyone lives and dies and lives and dies and lives and dies, and the schedule on that is more in God's hands than in our own.
Yeah, and oftentimes we'll, and I have done this too, I've sent cards that say, I'm sorry for the loss of your child or the loss of your husband, and really you don't ever lose someone. They change form, they transition, they change form. They no longer have the physical body you're used to, but from all the stories of people having experienced loved ones who've died on the other side, they recognize them. So either they have a similar look or an energy, but they do recognize them. So it's not as if you get on the other side and you can't find anybody or nobody can find you. And one of the things that I do, and I think it's one of the reasons that my communications with Stephen have been so full and clear, is that I take time to listen, and that's the only real difference between me and
Well,
anybody.
that's what they told you.
Yeah, they just said,
Why me? And you said, because you will listen.
yeah, I said, why me? Right, exactly. And they said, because you will listen. And I do, and I don't always follow what I get, but I do try to listen. And I have experienced a few of the things that Bill Guggenheim writes about with different loved ones that have died, like with my mother and my sister and other people. So I think we need to be aware. We need to keep a journal, because if we're going to communicate, we need to have a journal and write down, what did we ask, so that if we receive something, we at least have an idea of what we ask about. And if you do that, you can, in a very short period of time, establish a communication with your loved one that, while not as good, in my opinion, as having them there with you where you can hug them and see them, it is a way of communicating that is very healing, and we'll make do until we're together again, till we're all reunited. But do keep a journal. Write down the questions you ask, write down the thoughts and impressions, the feelings you get. When you ask a question, listen for what you think you hear as a reply. And after a while, you won't be thinking you hear it, you'll know that you hear it.
And in dreams, record your dreams, because many times the loved one will come to you in a dream, and it's easy to disavow it. Oh, it was just a dream. No. My mother had a dream that Jesus had come to her, and she was worried about it. She became fearful. And Casey said, anytime you have a dream like that, you want to cherish it. Right. Well, in these times, I want to remind you again of the 91st Psalm, and remind you that Casey says every decision is conditional. Now, the 91st Psalm is conditional. It starts off, he who dwells in the secret place of the Most High shall abide under the shadow of the Almighty. So the promise is, if you dwell in the secret place. And then it says, you needn't be fearful of any plague or any evil. It shall not come nigh thee. So read the 91st Psalm. Take that first sentence seriously. Make the attunement. And then begin not to be fearful. We don't have to be fearful about going out. We need to be wise and careful. But to put aside fear. Because fear is the opposite of love. And we need, especially now, to maintain our sense of love. Well, I'm going to ask Anne to have closing remarks and then lead us in a prayer. Afterwards, Bob and Mari will be on again with a song. Stay in touch with us and let us know what's happening with you and what you'd like to know about our teachings and how we may share more fully with you.
And don't hesitate to call us if you just feel like talking. We've had a few people call that just said, I just needed to talk to someone. We understand that. Even though we have each other to talk to, sometimes we just would just like to be able to talk to our Logos friends, and we pick up a phone and do it. It's not quite the same, but we're trying. But this is a good time to get in touch with your loved ones that you've thought, well, if it's really possible to communicate, maybe I should just try and see what happens. Because I will guarantee you, if you will practice this and persevere with it, you will be so comforted by the information you get. And I mean, there's a lot of information they want to give you. They want to tell you not only how they are, but they want to tell you things about what's going on in the world. And we're in the middle of a pandemic right now, and it's a time of a lot of fear for a lot of people. But fear makes you more vulnerable to illness, and so you want to stay solid and not be fearful during this time so that you keep your immune system up as much as possible. And we're getting regular chiropractic and those kind of things, and trying to exercise. We walked around Mountain Hills Lake, doing things to just try to get some exercise and stay as positive as possible during this time. So please don't hesitate to call us if you have any questions or just want to talk, and we would love to hear from you. And also keep in prayer those members of Logos as they come to mind. Whenever I think of somebody, I pray for them. They may not even need a prayer, but I pray for them.
Yeah, pray without ceasing.
And a book I want to just real quickly call to your attention, Cold Noses at the Pearly Gates. Not only do people survive death, but the souls of animals survive death. And this is it's the sweetest book. He had an animal that died, and it's just, you just cry, but it's so positive about what he realized about communicating with his animals and how he and his wife comforted each other. His name's Gary Kurz, and wrote a really good book there. But whatever we can do to give ourselves some positive hope and feedback about the continuity of life, I think that's really important. So I'd like to close with a prayer, and I made a joke the other day about happy deaths. He and I started singing this song to each other, Happy Deaths Are Here Again. I don't know what happened to us. We were having a senior moment, I guess. But we do want to make our deaths more peaceful and happier, and not to be fearful, because we think of death as the end. It's finished. We don't see anything. We don't know what's going on. But death is just the beginning of a new state of awareness. So let's close with a prayer, and we invite you to hold Logos in the palm of your hand and pray for us, and we will do the same for you. God, we thank you for all the people that have come together in prayer for this country during this time. We know that this is a difficult situation. We know that fear is paramount and that people are lonely and concerned. And we ask that you comfort the hearts of those that are worried, and that you bring healing to those in the hospitals and the nursing homes, and that you help us have an awareness of what we can do for our neighbors and our friends, so that we can be there for them and they for us during this difficult time. We thank you for our lives. We thank you for even this time in history that we'll look back on and see the things that we could have done better and things that we did well. Bless us and help us to always take the best and highest road and fulfill our sole purpose, is our prayer in the name of Christ. Amen.
Let it be so. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for joining us. God bless you.
Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer that calls me from a world of care and bids me at my Father's throne. Make all my wants and wishes known in seasons of distress and grief. My soul has often found relief and oft escaped the tempter's snare by thy return, sweet hour of prayer. Sweet hour of prayer, sweet hour of prayer, thy wings shall my petition bear to him whose truth and faithfulness engage. His grace. I'll cast on Him my every care, and wait for Thee, and wait for Thee, and wait for Thee.